Well, thank you very much. So I'm doing the part of the presentation and Michelle will be doing the other part of it. We are discussing the technology elements from the decadal survey. We discuss the complex problem of technology development for planetary science division, provide a comparison between the OPAG recommendations and how it compares against the decadal recommendations. Then provide a slide on the funding recommendation from decadal related to technology development, and then try to put the technology development in context. So instead of just having a shopping list of technologies, I tried to come up with a different framing of this problem and try to explain why technology development is such a complex, wicked problem, as they call it in design. Then Michelle will say a few words about technology prioritization, what was recommended in the decadal survey, and what we are trying to do about this. In the summary, try to point to the future about how we reflect on the decadal recommendations and how we try to implement something in the future. So first, a comparison. In this table, you can see two columns. The first column is recommended by OPAG, and the second column is where you can find the same technologies discussed in the decadal survey, the page numbers and the tables. So the decadal, the OPAG community recommended autonomy for science observations, data prioritization, data mining, navigation, planning, telecom, lending, hazard avoidance, and it's in the decadal survey. Also discussed radius to power systems, clearly identifying launch opportunities and how it's enabling technology. Also plutonium availability and the production rate, it's there. Technology is critical to enhancing the ocean world exploration, subsurface access for cryogenic vacuum environments, radiation hardened avionics, solar power, including LILT, low intensity, low temperature technology, batteries, including primary and secondary batteries, and instrument technologies. Then OPAG also recommended propulsion system, both chemical, electric, and also aerodynamic and aerospace propulsion systems, low freezing point, cold propulsion, cold gas propulsion, solar propulsion. We also discussed the radioisotope electric propulsion, but that was not made it into the decadal survey. Aero braking, aero capture, entry systems discussed there. Entry, descent, and landing technologies, including heat, discussed. Communications, including deployable antennas, high efficiency radio frequency, power amplifiers, optical comm, oceanward subsurface access. If you want to bore down to the ice, about how to communicate the way back, these different ways, and thermal management. So all of these are included in the decadal survey, but both of the OPAG recommendations and the decadal recommendation provided top level capabilities and technologies, not getting down specifics on all these technologies. Now, OPAG also recommended to have a robust, well-funded R&D program, including, for example, via PESTO, and that recommendation included, I have a slide on that on the next page, and also facilities development for testing technologies that are relevant to certain environments, also develop testbeds for this. Now, the decadal didn't specifically address this to much detail. They said, well, we would like to see testing capabilities, but didn't get into technology testing environments and testbeds, but it's mentioned there. I think once we come to the priorities and recommend something to NASA, this can be highlighted, what exactly we would like to see for these testing in relevant environments. So in summary, the decadal survey technology section provided a very comprehensive top-level list of technologies that aligned really well with the OPAG recommended technologies. However, they didn't provide details on these technologies and priorities on these technologies, neither OPAG, neither the decadal survey. Again, that will be a work for us to go forward. So regarding the funding allocation, there are two findings and two recommendations for technology. One of them on the finding for the PSD part of the funding. Verbatim, they said NASA has not sustained the recommended level of planetary technology funding 6 to 8% of the PSD budget, with the level declining to about 4% over the last 5 years. This is now significantly below the level of investment recommended in the past decadal survey. So the recommendation was that PSD should strive to consistently fund technology advancements at average rate of 68% of the PSD budget. So basically getting back to a level that was recommended in the previous decadal survey. The decadal also provided recommendations on the STMD funding related to PSD. And there is good news and bad news here. They reflected back saying, during the last decade, SMD, PSD, and SMD have worked together and developed high-risk technologies important to future planetary and astrobiology missions. Great. The bad news is that while there was a desirement to do this, but other higher priority agency needs creeped up, and sometimes the prioritization went different ways and didn't get all the funding allocated that they plan to allocate to this kind of collaboration. The recommendation is that STMD should ensure that the level of investment in SMD mission technologies is balanced at approximately 30% of the overall budget, and specifically the PSD portion at no less than 10%. So hopefully we can have that, and that will increase our technology capabilities. Now, instead of just going through our technologies in a kind of linear, kind of step-by-step kind of phone book way, I try to reframe the content of the decadal survey technology discussion through design thinking. And if you look at three elements of design thinking that we try to optimize, there is a desirability, there's a feasibility, and viability. So desirability is science, clearly. Feasibility technology that we want to develop and we want to use it to achieve those science goals, but also the resource requirements, you know, how much it's going to cost. So the science addressed through the decadal survey. For technology, we have technology development, capabilities, technology and concept maturation, mission phases, and technology topic areas. All of these are listed in the decadal survey. And for resources, we have NASA providing the funding at different funding levels. We have the technology funding sources, different programs which funds technology development. And we have the communities, the user and developer communities, and the people who benefit from these technology developments. So when I map them together, and I don't expect you to read this right now because I'm going through details kind of in a much clearer way, it just shows that space technology development is an over-constrained wicked problem. And we have competing goals and priorities, and we have limited resources to achieve these. So OPAG can shape these technologies by providing recommendation priorities to NASA and try to figure out which technologies we can develop that benefits our science missions for outer planets. So if you look at detail by detail, for the desirability, you have the decadal survey. The decadal survey provides information, the science goals and objectives, the potential missions that they recommended, and also technology needs that we need to achieve these missions. Great. Now we have to have money for this. And again, it's a very busy figure, but what you can see here is you have different entities interacting with each other to provide the funding. We are a government agency, we get the money from NASA, but to get the money, we have to have conversations before we get to that point to figure out what we ask for. So decadal is providing the science goals and objectives and recommends some kind of number of missions for flagship to new frontiers and discovery and so on. And NASA takes this information and say, what do we need for this to implement the development and running of these missions? So first, NASA is working with the various centers, NASA centers, to come up with a plan, how much money we would like to ask, and then working with the executive branch of the government to get an agreement saying this is how much money we would like to give to NASA, and that's the president budget request. Then they hand it over to the legislative branch. The legislative branch is kind of mulling over it, and they earmark some, take some stuff out, and eventually they appropriate the budget to NASA, and we execute on that. It's a yearly allocation. Every year we get a new budget, and then we execute on that. Now, so it means that this PPB process, the programming, planning, budgeting, and execution process, is an almost 3-year process. And then we executing in 1 year. The government is mulling over what we get for next year. In the meantime, we are trying to figure out how much we would like to ask for the following year. And it's all overlapping. And the other challenge here is that the cycles in the government are different. We have the 2-year elections for the House. We have the 4-year elections for the president. We have the 6-year election cycles for Senate members. And this changes the membership of the different groups who allocate money to NASA and kind of discusses the budget, the different committees. And so it means that there's some uncertainty built into the system that even though the present budget requests have some kind of money allocation identified, but by the time we get it, it might be different that was allocated and negotiated initially. So all of these kind of throw in the complexity into how to implement a long-term budget when we have this yearly uncertainty. So following on this, NASA gets the money, it comes down to the mission directorates, SMD gets the money, gets down to Planetary, and Planetary has certain programs. For example, PESTO is running different technology programs for instruments. For Picasso, we have low TRL development technologies from TRL 1 to 4. We have Matisse from TRL 4 to 6. We have IC, which is for ocean world technologies, and then IC satellite technologies, for example, Coltech, Aero, Sesame, and aerodynamics. Now, beside the technologies that are relevant to outer planets, of course, Planetary Science Division also develops technologies relevant to other destinations, for Mars exploration, lunar explorations. So not all the money that is coming to Planetary for technology development will end up supporting outer planets. And we have to, again, provide the rational prioritization about why we have to have a certain amount of money for our technologies. So beside SMD, there's also STMD. They have certain focused technologies which can be highly relevant for future outer planets missions. They include DSOC, which is Deep Space Optical Com, high power space computing, terrain relative navigation, entry descent landing, and extreme environment solar power generation. So that's for the instrument development, but also missions can develop technologies once we get the money from NASA, and then distributed within competed and directed missions. And these missions can mature technologies through the development process, through the different development phases. And the challenge here is how to infuse these technologies that we developed a certain tier level to missions. So we can have technology incentive programs, we can have include this technology into mission architectures, we can socialize, have conversations about these technologies, so we have acceptance from the community and from decision makers that these are good advancements for these capabilities. And the goal here is to try to reduce the technology infusion risk for these high tier programs. Then, I already mentioned the funding levels. We would like to get at least the same amount of money as was recommended in the previous decadal survey. And then all of these would be served by the community. So we have the developers who are getting the funding, develop the technologies, but sometimes the developers, the same people who are the users. So instrument development community can develop technologies and then also use the instruments and then benefiting other developers. For example, we have agencies within NASA, within prime contractors at JPL who are developing technologies. Within academia, we have that, and with our industry partners who are also developing capabilities that can enable these future missions. And again, going to feasibility, if you look at the decadal survey, on the left side, you have the summary table for technical topic areas. They split out the instrument developments for general remote sensing, in situ instruments, instrument to search for evidence of life, in situ sample handling and processing and analysis. And then there are general technical areas which included autonomy, challenging environment, cold and cryogenic sample return, technology, technical systems and engineering and integration, subsurface access, solar array, and batteries, radius to power system, communications, planetary protection, planetary defense, in situ mobility, launch, cruise, and encounter optimization, and entry descent landing systems. So these technical, very top level topics, and in the backup slides that you will find on the OPAG site, I had the findings from the decadal survey and the recommendations for each of these technology areas. Now, these technologies are matured through TRL levels, so we can measure how they evolve. From TRL1, I had an idea, to TRL9 is space qualified. And similarly for concept maturity, we have a similar range from concept maturity 1, so I have a nice concept in my head, to CML8, which is like ready to launch, it's ready for prime time. And while you're maturing the technologies through the different TRL levels or CML levels, it aligns with the mission phases. So you develop through the initial phase. When I have an idea, you go to pre-formulation for a pre-phase A study and see, what sticks. And then you evolve the concept into a level when you can propose it to NASA for funding during the formulation phase. And then once it's approved, once you get the money, you go to implementation. And then during the development of the project from phase B to D, you have funding from the project to develop the technology further. And then you get to operations when you try it out and make sure that everything is working just fine. So these technologies can be enabling and enhancing. And the challenge again here is that when you develop a technology which are emerging and have a high return of investment, high TRL, how to infuse that into a mission. And that's why we have to have processes to make sure that it's going to happen. So if there's one technology I'd like to kind of call out from the whole list is radius to power systems. The challenge here is that we have new frontiers coming up. New frontiers would need 1 or 2 next-gen RTG. Uranus flagship and probe mission probably need 3 or 4 next-gen RTGs. Then we have the Mars sample return in the decadal. It also needs a next-gen RTG, Endurance rover, another next-gen RTG. And then don't forget, we still have Dragonfly that we want to fly with an MMRTG. And the decadal pointed out we have about 30 kilograms of plutonium available, and that number is kind of a bit fuzzy, but let's say 30-ish. And then we have a capability to develop plutonium at the rate of 1.5 kilogram by 2026. So if you compare these two areas about how much we have or how much we can produce versus, what we need, then we end up with, we need more plutonium than what we can foresee to produce. The same for cladding, because you have to encapsulate the plutonium into cladding. You can produce about 10 or 15 per year. We need about 480 clads, and we have about 150. The plutonium, we need about 72 kilograms. We can foresee about 40 kilograms. Clear, we can reduce the need for plutonium if you have dynamic systems. But again, the possibility that when we can infuse these technologies, it's unclear. We are focusing currently on static conversion systems, and dynamic systems are being developed for the past 20 some years. And hopefully we get to that point, but would like to rely on something that is in the pipeline that we can actually infuse and kind of stepping stone from previous developments. So the recommendation from the decadal is that NASA should evaluate the plutonium production capabilities against the mission portfolio the same way as I was mentioning it here, and continue to invest to high maturity technologies, radius to power systems, including dynamic systems or higher conversion efficiencies for thermoelectrics, and to make sure that we are developing and developing this and staying on track to make sure that we can have these technologies available. So for all of these, we need priorities, and I'll pass it on to Michelle to say a few words about that part.
Thanks, Tibor. And thank you to Linda and Jeff for inviting me to join Tibor up here on the podium. Let me tell you first where I'm coming from. I actually work for the Space Technology Mission Directorate currently. I've been going to OPAG for years as an entry, descent, and landing technologist, but I've recently put on the hat of the chief architect for STMD as well. Which means that one of my primary responsibilities is to interface with the other mission directorates, SMD and ESDMD, the new Human Exploration Mission Directorate, recently renamed, to better get our technologies infused and understand the needs of the community. So I think this will be a fantastic opportunity with Carolyn Mercer as the chief technologist of SMD. With me in this new role, hopefully with Tibor in his new role and our newly released decadal survey to kind of, take stock of where we are and try to take some practical, tactical steps to improve the technology alignment with what the community needs. So here we have just kind kind of reiterated the recommendations on the programmatic side. So a lot of these pertain obviously to PSD, but you heard about the intersection with STMD, and I'm going to be focusing quite a bit of my time on that coming up. So PSD should create a PSD technology program plan that provides the details on the goals, how it operates, who's involved, and how the science community and supporting organizations can play a role. So, you heard Linda give a little statement this morning, a preview of the technology showcase that Carolyn is putting together in the fall. So that's an example of a tangible first step towards some of these recommendations. PSD should establish standard mechanism for the science community and other relevant organizations to provide input on technology needs. And so again, this community is part of that, communicating your needs so that they can be prioritized. Develop a set of return on investment metrics and look at obstacles that consider the long-term return on investment. We have tried over the years. I've been involved with Michael New and Kurt Niebuhr since Discovery, I think, 2009, in trying to identify high priority technologies and incentivize those or provide a risk buy on the TIMCO for certain technology implementations on missions. So we are almost ready to begin those conversations again for NF5. Between the two mission directorates. And so I look forward to being able to incorporate the OPAG priorities in that. So this is not rocket science here. This is, all of you will say, why did you put that on a slide? But just to kind of talk through it for a moment, as Tibor and I were talking about our new roles and how to kind of march forward together, these are some of the ideas we had, and we really welcome your feedback here. So, if we're going to prioritize technologies, first we got to see what we've got. So identify and characterize the current technology investments and programs. And Tibor did a great job of starting to do that on the previous charts. I will say, I won't do it today, but there's lots of backstory in terms of STMD's funding. I think we're going through a counting exercise to help PSD respond to the decadal to see how many, what investments we are making that go towards planetary science. And it probably is not the 10% that is recommended in the decadal, but we'll get a good sense of that as well as, be able to project perhaps. We have the same challenge that SMD does. We have a president's budget level, and then we have what we actually get, which is not near that. So, and we have a lot of congressional direction that we get to implement as well. Luckily, part of that is in the nuclear portfolio, and so we can look at synergies there. So, looking at these current technology investments, interface with the center technologists and SMEs. There is a cadre of chief technologists like myself who span all the areas of technology investment that have a really good sense of what's going on across the whole landscape. We want to provide greater opportunities for technical interchange between scientists and technologists, build that trust as Tibor had on his chart, socialize. Collaborate with flagship mission study teams to understand needs and timing. And so today, is part of that. Seeking feedback from the proposing organizations, APL, JPL, Goddard, scientists, to make sure that we're aligned. If we just go off and start developing technologies that aren't ready until 2040, that doesn't really do you much good. And then probably the hardest part is going to be developing criteria for prioritization. Some of the terms that were used in the decadal, we use enabling, enhancing, but dormant. We're struggling right now with, we've done some technology developments and now they're sitting on the shelf. Who keeps track of those? Who knows that those are available and, when they can be pulled off the shelf and what it would take to do that? ROI and need date again. Engage the community for feedback, obviously, continuously, and develop OPAG findings to influence investments and infusion strategies. So I'll turn it back over to Tibor to close out.
Thank you very much, Michelle. So before going to the conclusions, I'd like to circle back a little bit. So I mentioned one high priority technology, radius to power systems. That's not the only one. So we have other technologies that we can highlight, which would be equally similarly high priority that can enable future missions. And one example could be avionics. If you look into the current state of practice, we've been using Red 750 for decades, for a very, very long time. And it served its purpose, but now there are emerging capabilities that can surpass its capabilities and provide a much better service for our future missions. And those technical developments are very important. The challenge here again is that if you propose something to NASA or to the reviewers with Red 750, they know what it is. If you propose something new technologies, then you may get weaknesses for your review. So we have to socialize this, as we mentioned before, and Michelle mentioned as well, with the community, with NASA, with the reviewers, to make sure that these technologies not paying during reviews just by being proposed, and enable these new technologies to emerge and enable the future capabilities. So in summary, if you look at the decadal survey, are we here? I'm in the right side? Did we advance? Yes, so in summary, so the decadal identified high priority technology capabilities, but they didn't provide prioritization. So the challenge here for us is to figure out what to do with this recommendation and how to make sure that we can implement this for the next decade. So what we try to do as technologists, we try to work with the community, with the science community, to identify, prioritize, develop, and infuse OPAG-specific technologies into future missions and mission architectures in a timely manner. We want to inform the community, particularly the OPAG science related to the technology development of new capabilities that the community can use for these future missions, and also provide a recommendation to NASA on these priorities. So in that case, they can allocate the funding to develop those technologies. And we also try to come up with infusion mechanisms I mentioned before that using technology incentives, buy-in from SMD, and for the risks and the risk posture. So the other thing that we'd like to do is we'd like to have technologists be involved with mission concept studies in early phase to inform scientists about what new technologies can be considered and have this conversation back and forth between mission pool and technology push. Then we are trying to build that OPAG technology community. We can do it multiple ways, as also recommended the decadal survey. We can either form a new planetary science division technology assessment group similar to other assessment groups, or we can maintain collaboration between different ACT technologists and make sure that we are on the same page. Of course, each ACT has different focus, different directions, and we want to understand how to serve our community the best, and also how to work with the whole community to make sure that NASA's technology platform is advancing in this way. So again, circling back to the radial power system, if there is one technical recommendation I'd like to highlight, is that PSD should provide a clear guidance and commitment to the OPAG community at the earliest possible time to identify the number of radial power systems and type of radial power systems for the upcoming flagship missions, New Frontiers 5 missions, and also other missions enabled by RPSs, because it's crucial for mission planners, scientists, and technologists while developing the mission concepts, which are kind of working against certain deadlines. And we have to have those kind of understanding on the availabilities. So that's it. Thank you very much. If any questions, we'll try to understand.
Thanks, Tibor. Thanks, Michelle. Just one quick comment to number and type. I would add schedule. You want number, type, and schedule.
Yeah.
Morgan, go ahead.
There is one additional question online, Tibor. You already addressed one from Tony Freeman about avionics, but Tony Freeman does have another one. The Planetary Science and Astrobiology Decadal Survey recommends optical comm, quote, will be capable of meeting future communication demands, end quote. But our analysis says optical comm won't work for outer planets.
That's absolutely true. As I said, I didn't highlight what the potential kind of technologies that can be high priorities. And that's why we have this ongoing conversation with the community saying, if you provide the priority to headquarters about what to develop, where to put the money, then this conversation will be crucial to make sure that we have the right priorities and the right technologies. Thanks.
In the room, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for that presentation. I was wondering, do you have any recommendations on where we can actually have funding for things like science autonomy, which you did outline, and so did the decadal?
I don't have it on the top of my head, but I can get back to you on that.
Excellent, thank you.
Thanks.
Another question in the room?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to ask a question. So you talked a lot about planetary science technology. Obviously, we're in a planetary science meeting. That makes a lot of sense. But I just wanted to point out that a lot of the technologies that you talked about, communications, power, avionics, autonomy, those are not unique to planetary science, right? They are broad for space exploration in general. And so I wanted to pose the question to you and to others is, are we disadvantaging ourselves by only looking at planetary science when we think about this? Obviously, Michelle talked a little bit about looking outside of SMD, but what about within SMD at the other divisions like heliophysics, astrophysics that are going to need the same technologies?
Do you want to address it? I can address it, but
Go ahead.
So I don't have a good sense yet for how, SMD works internally in terms of technology across its divisions. And I think we saw that as one of the findings or recommendations in the decadal survey. But I will say that, STMD by its very nature is focused on cross-cutting technologies as the highest priority. If it's going to serve more than one mission directorate, that bumps it up for us. And so you make a very good point that, some of these subsystem level technologies and basic capabilities are really where we need to, leverage the synergies. There are many things that we're developing for human exploration of the moon that could very well be applied to planetary science. We just don't say it in that bin. So I think that is forward work for us. And to your point on autonomy is one of our, 12 areas that we're investing in STMD, but getting more specific about how it is applied to the missions of interest to this community is what we need to go do.
yeah, okay.
Pat, go ahead.
Yeah, so I've just got to mention something from a historical perspective. There actually were two reports that probably didn't get into the decadal survey, and I'm not quite sure why. The first is a report that was done at the last, about 10 years ago, which is Planetary Science, which was instigated by Jim Green. And there was a technology assessment, if you will, of all the planetary science missions. It's how to do technology within Planetary Science Division at headquarters. And there was a team of people that worked in it. Tibor led that, and it was published. So I don't think there's a remembrance of that. It came out with recommendations for the Planetary Science Division as to what to do and how to do it. It's the how, that was the how. The what was done, of course, in the V&V 10 years ago in the decadal survey. And so the combination worked quite well. But subsequent to that, there actually is a planetary science technology plan, and that didn't get into the decadal survey. I'm not quite sure why not, but that was done in 2015. So there is planning for that. It has been a policy of the Planetary Science Division not to prioritize technologies and not to have a technology line, right, other than RPS. And so this actually presents a bigger problem. And I think that's what Mark and Miguel were doing for, we're trying to get the process right in the Planetary Science Division. And I think that's the problem that needs to get addressed. But I think it might behoove Michelle and Tibor and anyone else to look at the prior plan, because that's exactly what we did. But the philosophy at the time was not to have priorities, but to have a list of technologies that they could fund when they had funds. And that does not serve I don't think that serves Planetary Science Division very well, even though I'm part of that community. But I think we need to address this with Planetary Science Division and not step out ahead of them in terms of getting their priorities right.
Thanks. I agree. I agree. Well, the fact that, the decadal survey didn't provide priorities, and that's one thing. We have an umbrella list of technologies that overlaps all the needs that we have for not only our OPAG, but also other planetary destinations. What we can do is now, as I mentioned before, work with the community, work with technologists, and identify to push for certain priorities that we want to develop. And we can revert back to the reports that you're referring to and mine the information that, work with the community, identify the missions, upcoming missions, identify technologies that they need, and then provide us. So in that case, we can guide future funding of technologies.